part of Jade Helm training.
It is a preparation for martial law.
We reach out to the guys that we know. They volunteer their land.
And why does this leaked map of the Jade Helm exercise show Texas, Utah, and part of California as hostile territories?
It's a document, but it doesn't have any context or subtext associated with it.
Governor Greg Abbott asked the Texas State Guard to monitor Jade Helm.
He has been very pleased with the progress of the training exercise.
The U.S. military is planning an unprecedented training exercise this summer called Operation Jade Helm 15 across 7 states.
Speculation about why the military wants to train in American communities instead of military bases is fueling a growing number of theories across the internet and social media.
So how counties were picked in Texas comes down to this. The land was volunteered by the private landowner. They came to us. Okay? They are not getting any reimbursement for volunteering their land.
Says Big Spring landowners paid to accommodate Jade Helm. This is a quote from the mayor, Larry McLeland.
What do Arizona, Utah, Nevada, Texas, New Mexico, California, and Colorado all have in common? From July 15th to September 15th, each of these states will be part of a gigantic military exercise held by Uncle Sam on U.S. soil. In fact, one of the biggest in U.S. history. Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about Jade Helm 15. You will hear people saying that this is secretly a program to institute martial law, especially the rumor that these unused Walmarts were going to be staging areas or FEMA collection camps, and that there were underground tunnels. There are disturbing things. We should say that out of those 7 states we just named, only 5 are going to be part of these active military operations, having soldiers and special forces assets on the ground. And according to official accounts, what they are doing is these operations. Essentially, you could say this is a dress rehearsal for a war. Or when you see most of the commonplace reports of this sort of stuff, you see the tip of the iceberg and not the big explanation under the water, beneath the surface, about why this stuff is occurring. Jade Helm is a challenging 8-week joint military and interagency unconventional warfare exercise conducted throughout Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, Nevada, Utah, and Colorado. Complaints are that there might be people going around carrying blanks in their guns, and this has the population of these areas worried.
Once we get to the core of the economic drivers and making sure that we've got issues of infrastructure being able to be taken into account, and acknowledging that so much of the environmental footprint isn't about our total number, but it's about where we live and how we live, sustainable communities. The right way to deal with population policy is not through an arbitrary and ultimately senseless debate about total numbers.
Coalition's very prepared to support policies that ensures a greater spread of the population and supports regional areas. But we shouldn't kid ourselves that that happens overnight, and we shouldn't kid ourselves that that absolves a government from the responsibility of seeking to manage things that were within its control, which is obviously the migration program.
The philanthropist and entrepreneur Dick Smith made his first fortune selling consumer electronics. He rode waves of economic growth. Now he wants to get off.
I've benefited from the growthy economy without any doubt more than most people, but I've come to realise that it's going to destroy Australia and the world for our children and grandchildren.
I think it might have focused on population growth in the next decade at least, to be more specific, because I think in the next decade it's pretty clear that migration is going to remain relatively high. If we're going to have 250 each year, and the domestic labour supply will at best produce about 100,000 of those. Throughout Australian history, migration has been driven by labour demand in Australia. And there are periods in Australia, and sometimes long periods in Australia, where migration was close to zero because there was very little labour demand in Australia, so, say in the 1930s, but also mid-1970s, early 1990s. But we're now in a period of very strong labour demand, and we can expect lots of migration as a result of that.
If you were to set targets 5 years ago, it would have been done without knowing anything that we're about to have a global financial crisis, nor understanding the implications of mining boom Mark II, where the dollar would end up, where our terms of trade would go.
What defines China's policy in this, and how can it help fulfill the UN Sustainable Development Goals? That China wants to be a staunch safeguard and contributor to regional and global peace and development. As China sticks to its multilateral approach to global governance, and the Belt and Road Initiative, how can China contribute to the global efforts to achieve the United Nations 17 Sustainable Development Goals? Is willing to align its development planning with the UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, meaning the 17 Sustainable Development Goals?
The Sustainable Development Goals are breathtaking in their ambition. I think we can use that word. Eradicate poverty, provide clean drinking water for everyone, peaceful and stable societies. I mean, they're very idealistic, and they're comprehensive. They're 17, but of course they're detailed in so many ways that one shudders almost to think, how can they be accomplished? So we start there.
Yeah.
China, though, it's good to hear China's leadership talking about working with the United Nations and within this framework, because if these goals are going to be established and achieved in any meaningful way, one would expect that China would have to play an important role.
We are 1/5 of humanity.
China's leadership has spoken frequently recently about markers of sustainable development in the Chinese economy that seem to make perfect sense and be perfectly compatible in contributing to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So there has been an emphasis on eliminating poverty, rural poverty in particular, in China. And I know there's criticism that some say, what about the urban poor who have moved to the cities? But nonetheless, the government has focused on eliminating poverty. There is, as we all know, been a real emphasis on sustainability and on environmental stewardship. If China doesn't take the lead in this area, along with the United States and others, they won't be achieved.
There are people who are saying, however, that it seems that China has put particular emphasis on certain aspects of these development goals, such as what you mentioned, poverty and energy or environment, but there are also 15 others at least. And there are people who are saying that they have to be interconnected, that you can't really just work on some of these goals and ignore the other, because otherwise it wouldn't be meaningful.
That's right.
For everyone here tonight not familiar with Agenda 21, I would suggest that this is the beginning of your learning curve, not the end.
This is Agenda 21. This is the United Nations plan. It's a 300-page, 40-chapter plan. And ICLEI was created in 1990, prior to this plan's adoption, to implement United Nations Agenda 21 sustainable development worldwide. Sustainable development is a term that was defined by the United Nations, and all of these terms come out of the United Nations. Smart growth is part of the United Nations Agenda 21. Your general plan elements are designed in accordance with United Nations Agenda 21 principles. The plan restricts your choices, it limits your ability to govern yourself, and it takes away your freedom. This seems like a rhetorical statement, but it really is not. This is actually what this plan does. And using the cover of environmental concern, our private property rights and our civil rights have been diminished, and they will continue to be so unless we call a halt to it. ICLEI is the International Council for Local Environmental Initiatives, but it changed its name so that you wouldn't know that it's international. It seems like all of these things seem like they sound so good. Sustainable development, green, vibrant, walkable, bikeable. You know, how could you be against that? But really, when you know about this plan, it is really very serious.
On the ICLEI website, it says 200 local governments from 43 countries convened at our inaugural conference, the World Congress of Local Governments for Sustainable Future at the United Nations in New York. I think there's a connection. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Mora?
Former President of the United States, George Bush Sr. said, effective execution of Agenda 21 will require a profound reorientation of human society, unlike anything the world has ever experienced. A major shift in the priorities of both governments and individuals, and an unprecedented redeployment of human and financial resources. Dixie Ray, former Washington State Governor and Assistant Secretary for Oceans and International Environmental and Scientific Affairs, stated, Agenda 21 seeks to establish a mechanism for transferring the wealth from citizens to the third world. Fear of environmental crisis would be used to create a world government and UN central direction. This segment of our society, who fear one world government and UN invasion, through which our individual freedoms will be stripped away, would actively work to defeat any elected official who joined the conspiracy by undertaking Agenda 21. So we will call our process something else. We will call it comprehensive planning, or growth management, or smart growth. We ended up with sustainable development.
Sustainable development has become the popularized expression for Agenda 21. Agenda 21 is the 1992 United Nations Rio Declaration on the Environment and Development.
It is the agenda for the 21st century you're living in today. For a brave new world where everything that you cherished and held true
will no longer exist. Agenda 21 defines itself as the comprehensive plan of action to be taken globally, nationally, and locally by organizations of the United Nations systems.
It also elevates nature above man. And it contains something called the precautionary principle, where basically you're guilty until you're proven innocent.
It's a 40-chapter document to basically control the world. It's based entirely on socialist control mechanisms.
Sustainable developers have designed a global movement coordinated through a global to local action plan to create world government in accordance with certain objectives. The focus of sustainable development is the abolition of private property, societal undermining of the family, and abandonment of the constitutional protection of unalienable rights as described in the Declaration of Independence. You see, I sat on the Santa Cruz Agenda 21 committees. Now, this was a lot of crazy ideas. This was back in the mid-90s. Crazy ideas I heard. Mother Earth's surface wasn't to be scratched. Human beings were to be concentrated into human settlement zones. Educational systems were to focus on the environment as the central organizing principle. All aspects of life were covered. Well, I went to these committees at the request of some people who told me that I needed to understand what was going on, and I came back and I said, this is craziness. This is so silly. It has no chance of having any effect on our society. Well, I was wrong. The United States government's support for Sustainable Development, Agenda 21, is very clear. In 1992, while the Rio Conference was going on, George Bush, then president, was there where he executed the Agenda 21 protocols on behalf of the United States and brought it back to Washington, D.C. Within a year, Bill Clinton, by executive order, no congressional review, established the President's Council for Sustainable Development. It's a partnership between selected developers building this new world order and the government using the American taxpayer dollars in order to do it.
America. You live in the suburbs? Don't get too comfy. Our next guest says the Obama administration has plans to push Americans slowly but surely out of the burbs and into the big cities as a means to, quote, spread the wealth around.
Charlotte Iserby, I owe you an apology. I did not believe for the longest time it was a deliberate dumbing down. I thought the dumbing down was a natural consequence of a bad idea. Folks, it's deliberate. It's deliberate.
The sustainable globalist goal is the orchestration of a planned fall of American principles, values, and lifestyles. The effect on the average American will be devastating. With modernizing technology, the ordinary person will live without independence, privacy, or substantive rights.
This government has been working overtime to take away our rights to common law through many pieces of legislation. Common law is what guarantees us an ability to correct injustices. This coming year, I promise you, you will also hear debate over a number of pieces of legislation that will further erode our common law rights. And you have to get behind me on this, ladies and gentlemen, to stop this from going through. As Agenda 21 became more and more apparent to me, I began using the line in Parliament, the government was now declaring war on its own citizens. And that goes back as far as 2008. This, of course, led me to being labelled a conspiracy theorist. But here we are now, openly talking about Agenda 21 and the ramifications we will see in a short period of time if this is not stopped in its tracks. The environmental crisis will be the international disaster that will unlock the New World Order.
In the year 2015, the world agreed on the ambitious, inclusive, and universal Sustainable Development Goals, making a commitment to leave no one behind.
It is so decided.
Just a few months later, we are already seeing those promises transform into first concrete steps for action. On 21st of April, presidents, prime ministers, and other high-level representatives from around the world gathered at the UN headquarters in New York for a high-level debate on achieving the SDGs now that the goals and targets have been set.
We have no time to waste.
It's now time to turn this agreement into policies and action, into laws and budget lines.
Also on hand were several of the SDG advocates, prominent members of various segments of the society, from government, business sector, entertainment, sports and culture, whose mission is to raise awareness for the SDGs and spur public into action towards their implementation. Prominent members of various segments of the society, from government, business sector, entertainment, sports and culture, whose mission is to raise awareness for the SDGs and spur public into action towards their implementation.
All of these things are touching us. All nations are involved in this, and unless we deal with that, unless we all come together, we won't be able to solve the problems of our own country because we haven't solved the problems of the other.
We need first to take seriously the goals, because these are the world's goals. They're the only goals we're going to have for our generation. These are the world's goals. They're the only goals we're going to have for our generation. They're the only goals we're going to have for our generation.
Today, the greatest risk of global catastrophe doesn't look like this. Instead, it looks like this. If anything kills over 10 million people in the next few decades, it's most likely to be a highly infectious virus rather than a war. Not missiles, but microbes. We're not ready for the next epidemic. Let's look at Ebola.
We've been asking the Public Health Agency of Canada for months what it got from the two companies that it sold the commercial licensing rights to for the experimental vaccine and the experimental drug, ZMapp. We wanted to know if Canada still has any voice in the development and dissemination of the treatments. We got back emails saying the contract is confidential, that Canada still owns the patent and the intellectual property. But that's now being questioned by scientists around the world who are waiting to do clinical trials on the vaccine. This Berlin-based journalist wrote the article.
The scientists I talked to are unhappy. They feel it could have gone faster. Who is in control of this process?
Everyone figured this outbreak would be long over before a vaccine could be developed. But with the number of Ebola cases doubling every 3 weeks and scientists around the world saying it's out of control, the need for a vaccine is growing. Meanwhile, up to 1,000 doses are in cold storage here at the National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg.
That African trials of this Canadian vaccine have in fact been delayed, not because of logistical problems, but over an intellectual property dispute. The company that owns the commercial license for the drug is said to be dragging its feet. With thousands of lives at risk, can the Minister of Health explain what Canada is doing?
The only answer Ottawa's given so far is that all of this is in the hands of the World Health Organization.
I'm sure all of you read about it in the newspaper. Lots of tough challenges. I followed it carefully through the case analysis tools we use to track polio eradication.
It has been an agonizing 4 years for the family of Keta Tenge and 27 others. The 2015 jab completely took a toll and a turn on their lives, and since then, their parents say they have known no peace of mind. Across the village, the misery pans out all too well. Pamela Omekede, another parent, heaps the blame on the Busia County government. Despite a court order that they be compensated for the negligence of the county health staff and pay 42 million shillings, very little has been done. In their conditions, the affected children require specialized attention. Constantly on medication and other specialized needs, the parents' meager resources are depleted. The county, they say, keeps on making promises that it has never bothered to fulfill. Government having not paid, the 28 children can only wish for a better life. Their happy childhood memories already dealt a blow by the damaging job in 2015.
The problem was that we didn't have a system at all. In fact, there are some pretty obvious key missing pieces. We didn't have a group of epidemiologists ready to go who would have gone, seen what the disease was, see how far it had spread. The case reports came in on paper. It was very delayed before they were put online, and they were extremely inaccurate. We didn't have a medical team ready. There was no one there to look at treatment approaches, no one to look at the diagnostics, no one to figure out what tools should be used. As an example, we could have taken the blood of survivors, processed it, and put that plasma back in people to protect them, but that was never tried. So there was a lot that was missing, and these things are really a global failure. The WHO is funded to monitor epidemics, but not to do these things I talked about. So next time we might not be so lucky. You can have a virus where people feel well enough while they're infectious that they get on a plane or they go to a market. The source of the virus could be a natural epidemic like Ebola, or it could be bioterrorism. And so there are things that would literally make things 1,000 times worse. We should be concerned. But in fact, we can build a really good response system. We have the benefits of all the science and technology that we talk about here. We've got cell phones to get information from the public and get information out to them. We have satellite maps where we can see where people are and where they're moving. We have satellite maps where we can see where people are and where they're moving. We have advances in biology that should dramatically change the turnaround time to look at a pathogen and be able to make drugs and vaccines that fit for that pathogen. So we can have tools, but those tools need to be put into an overall global health system.
Two big pharmaceutical corporations, Merck & Company and GlaxoSmithKline, launched their commercially licensed preventive HPV vaccines in India in 2008. Gardasil by Merck and Cervarix by Glaxo claimed to help prevent cervical cancer. Their marketing was aggressive, and results were shocking. As part of clinical trials, 14,000 tribal girls were vaccinated in Khammam district of Andhra Pradesh, but 4 of them died within 6 months of the vaccination. Their deaths during clinical trials for HPV vaccines have raised serious issues about the efficacy, safety, and consent of the subject of these clinical experiments. The state government of Andhra Pradesh and Gujarat gave permission to Merck & Company to conduct clinical trials which they called Demonstration Project. In the month of July 2009, Merck & Company, with the help of an international NGO based in the US called PATH, India Council of Medical Research, and local health workers, started these trials in Khammam. It is shocking that all these trials were conducted under the name of National Rural Health Mission. Most of the girls vaccinated were from marginalized sections of society. Their families were misinformed and kept in the dark about the side effects of the vaccine. While the Health Minister of Andhra Pradesh, D. Nagendra, claims that these deaths have nothing to do with the vaccination, however, families of the deceased say that their daughters have died as a result of the side effects of the HPV vaccine. They claim that the trials were done without taking their consent. According to ICMR's guidelines, for clinical evaluation of a new drug, the study in children should always be carried out after phase 3 clinical trials in adults. It can be studied earlier only if the drug has a therapeutic value in a primary disease of the children. In that case, why was Merck given permission to conduct these trials on minor girls?
We did this after getting completely all the ethical approvals. The Government of India was involved in this. ICMR is the vanguard for the Government of India. They are the ones who gave us the permission, and so we did this with the complete drug controllers.
Cervical cancer is the second largest cause of death among women in India. According to the World Health Organization study, 1 of every 8 cervical cancer patients in the world is an Indian. Human papilloma virus, or HPV, causes the cancer of the cervix. Over 100 types of HPV viruses have been classified, and about a dozen of them are sexually transmitted, which may cause cancer of the cervix. The infection caused by HPVs takes at least 15 to 20 years to lead to cancerous growth in the body. Many non-profit health organizations have pointed out that the regular pap smear tests of women above the age of 30 is the only key to control mortality rate caused by cervical cancer. Otherwise, deaths will continue. It is incomprehensible that why the state government was keen to promote such an expensive vaccine. The vaccine has a period of 3 to 5 years, after which booster dose has to be given. Hence, the total cost of the vaccine turns out to be unaffordable for the poor.
We cannot afford to have such expensive vaccine which has not been proved of its efficacy, and we don't even know its immunological protection, and the side effects were not even established, and there are no studies of the long-term adverse events. If you look at the cost of it, one vial of Gardasil is 9,000 rupees. Okay, that means 3 shots, 0, 2 and 6. Like if I am taking in first month and after 2 months and then after 6 months. So that is the dosage for Gardasil. Cervarix is 3,300 rupees, which is much more expensive. So almost 33,000 rupees per woman I am spending on this vaccine. We don't even have rupees 20 to spend on reproductive and child health program on women per annum.
This controversy has also raised eyebrows about the nexus between pharmaceutical companies, NGOs and the state.
Look at the scenario here. You have the NGO and they have been funded by Bill and Melinda Gates, and then they are coming to this place, and first of all they have collaborated with Indian Council of Medical Research, and the vaccines were supplied by Merck free of cost. See the nexus. And then they go to the state government, they collaborated with the state government, and they use the logo of National Rural Health Mission on the HPV vaccination cards. So NGO is not doing directly, they are very smart, they have done through the state government. Like now we make the state accountable. Party is not coming into any public domain and answering. Of course, we have to make state accountable. At the same time, I think even party is answerable as an NGO. We are an NGO in that way.
According to the statement issued by Dr. Christopher Elias, President and CEO of PATH, to date, no deaths have been casually associated with HPV vaccination in India or elsewhere. Experience with the HPV vaccines used in post-licensure observational study confirmed the good safety profile reported in criminal trials. Many women's groups and non-profit health organizations like Sama, Saheli have brought out this issue to the public domain for debate.
Easy for PATH to say, look, it's not our fault. We trained a couple of ANMs or ASHA workers, and if they haven't followed consent, it's their fault, because basically that's what this statement means. They are trying to shrug off their own accountability.
Although the trials have been temporarily stopped and a committee has been formed to look into the matter, but the deaths of these tribal girls have once again proved that the lives of the poor and the underprivileged in our country is worthless. The market gurus have predicted that the Indian cervical market is a growing and healthy global market. Yes, a healthy market where big pharmaceutical companies make profits by treating poor innocent people as guinea pigs.
The best lessons, I think, on how to get prepared are, again, what we do for war. What are the key pieces? First is we need strong health systems in poor countries. That's where mothers can give birth safely, kids can get all their vaccines, kids can get all their vaccines, kids can get all their vaccines, but also where we'll see the outbreak very early on. We need a medical reserve corps. Lots of people who've got the training and background who are ready to go with the expertise. And then we need to pair those medical people with the military, taking advantage of the military's ability to move fast, do logistics, and secure areas. We need to do simulations, germ games, not war games. The last time a germ game was done in the United States was back in 2001. The World Bank estimates that if we have a worldwide flu epidemic, global wealth will go down by over $3 trillion. And we'd have millions and millions of deaths. Millions and millions of deaths. Millions and millions of deaths.